Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm so glad to be with you today. We've had a lot going on over the past 24 hours, and so we will have a we'll have a look back and have a look forward. I want you to stream us on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. We're doing something a little different right now as I build out my home studio. We have two distinct hours, so you have to click the link for both hours so that you can. Guess what? Not only can you hear us, you can see us if you go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. And if you go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page, and you'll get a chance to see the fabulous, gorgeous C.K. Hoffman, who's also brilliant. But what's more important? Happy Valentine's Day, girl. And Attorney Daryl Jones, of course, you see her on Court TV, former president of the National Bar Association, which is the largest and oldest black bar association in the world, more than 65,000 lawyers. Attorney Daryl Jones, one of, and she's the chair of Radio Push. Let me not forget that. And she does so much. I don't know, she does it all and has this very, very successful practice. Attorney Daryl Jones, voting rights advocate. He and Barbara Arnwine are perhaps the leading voting rights advocates in the United States today. And he's the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Dwight McKee, brilliant social scientist, dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project. He's also one of the founders of Operation Push. He's with the National Action Network. His activism never stops and knows no bounds. And he's been a mentor to so many down through the years. We're so excited to have everybody here today. Got a lot to talk about. We're going to be welcoming Reverend Dr. Yeri on in a little bit. But of course, on once a week, we have legal Q&A with CK. We're off by a day. We're going to work it out next week. And we get a chance to ask CK Hoffler all kinds of questions about the law. We get a chance to break things down. Of course, we're going to be looking at the Fani Willis case today. It turns out former President Trump says he's going to meet her in court. Wow. That's going to be really, really fascinating. But now we're beginning to get many more details about her case that might impact what you think about this case. And we're going to be looking at the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas. Why did that happen? Many in the GOP said this was not a good thing to do. We've gone down a rabbit hole, everybody. Now impeachment, which is a very, very serious matter, is going to be used in a petty way. Many people feel that there was nothing that the secretary did that rose to the level of impeachment, but he's been impeached. So what does that mean? It means he's been indicted. It means he's going to have to be tried. And we will just see how all of that's going to work out. And of course, George Santos, people were wondering, who's going to replace him? Will a Republican or a Democrat? Well, it turns out a Democrat has replaced him, narrowing this Republican majority, which has been razor thin. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because indeed, the Speaker Johnson said, well, I don't know why Democrats are cheering because he ran as a Republican. Had some conservative views, some people think, on migration. So we will break all of that down as we dispel the myths about how much Trump has cost the party. When you look at what if you look over the landscape from 2022 to 2023, 2/3 to 80% of the races of the people he endorsed won. So I don't know what numbers they're looking at, but if you go to Ballotpedia, that's what it shows us. So let's get right to it. Let's Attorney C.K. Hoffler, let's start with, I think, something that we are looking at right now. I think it's a sign of the times. Of course, Super Bowl weekend, I think this was probably the most watched show, they said, in television history. So there was a tremendous amount of interest, due, I'm sure, in no small measure to Taylor Swift and all of that. I don't understand all of that, but then, maybe it's an age thing. I don't know. That having been said, wishing everybody a happy Valentine's Day. We see the Kansas City team have gone back to Kansas City. They were having their rally. And it turns out, according to this CNN report, thus far, one person is dead. And multiple people were injured in a rally shooting. It seems like this is a sign of the times, CK. I'm going to pass that around to the rest of the panel.
Well, Santita, I think it is a sign of the times. It's very unfortunate that after this major victory, this really very, 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 very competitive game where Kansas City pulled it out at the last minute, that there would be this type of a tragedy to happen that, a couple of days after, in Kansas City. That's just really tragic. It is a sign of the times. I think people are taking to guns when they're upset. Many people are carrying guns in states. And Kansas is one of those states where a lot of people have guns, and they're using their guns. And this is the danger of having laws that liberally allow anyone and everyone to have a gun. So if you're drinking, if you are, which usually happens when there's a rally, people are so excited by this victory. Then if you have a disagreement or someone pushes you, you take out your gun and you shoot them. I mean, this is unfortunate. It is a sign of the times. It is a sign that there is no gun control in this country. And it's also a sign that we had better change things as it relates to gun control, or we're going to have pandemonium every time people gather. I think it's very unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. Attorney Darrell Jones?
I guess initially we have to certainly put our thoughts and prayers to those that have been injured as a result of the shooting. And whether it happens at a rally from the Super Bowl, or if it happens just in the back alley of some street in some city, anyone who is impacted, affected by a shooting, it just continues to raise the question of, what are we going to do about all these guns that are in the streets? And, perhaps we can use what has happened now in Kansas City as a launching pad to, certainly, go in deeper with regards to, gun legislation and trying to restrict the gun access that people have. I do a lot of criminal defense work, and I tell you, the ease of which guns are obtained, the number of guns that are on the streets, and not simply by adults, but by juveniles as well. So, and we don't have all the information right now with regards to this shooting. We know that there are 2 people that are in custody regarding this shooting, but, we've got to use this as an opportunity to really dig down and start asking that question of what do we want to be like as a society with regards to guns? And this has got to be one of those, at some point, we've got to say, enough is enough, and start digging down into it.
Dwight, is it the guns, or is it us, or is it both?
It's both. And the sad part is right now it's become almost an expectation that at a large event there's going to be some shooting or some shootout. And so it's geared up for that. Now you have excessive police there. You have a whole trauma unit there, ambulances everywhere. The hospitals are on alert. And so it is almost an expectation, and they almost build it into the celebration that at some point there's going to be a shootout somewhere. And it's a very sad state of affairs that's really right now is kind of unique to America, but I think it's becoming a part of the nomenclature of the whole world as
but Dwight,
these guns expand.
What is it about America? Because when you leave the United States, and CK, you've lived out of the United States for significant chunks of your life. I've spent a lot of time working outside of the United States, and even, occasionally living outside of the United States. People look at us as a gun-driven culture. Dwight, and then I want to kick it back to you, CK. I mean, what is it about America?
Well, because we have a gun fetish. We have a fascination, a fixation on guns. And the notion that every man has the right to secure his castle. And we always say, well, when your castle is stolen, then you need a moat, you need arrows, you need bows, you need something to secure your castle, because you always feel it's under attack, because the founding of the country was founded in that atmosphere. It was founded with people who came from another land to a stolen land. And so they always felt compelled to protect themselves. And the best way then at that point to protect themselves was with guns. So they actually built into the Constitution, they had a right to protect themselves therein the right to have a gun, the right to be armed. And so when you justify that, you really create a fascination, you create a fetish around it until it becomes a rite of passage. And so now it's built into the very fiber of the culture. So since it's at hand, it becomes your first response to resolution, to conflict resolution. Is, some folk wrestle in some cultures, some folk race in some cultures. In our culture, we shoot each other. That's how we resolve conflict.
CK, I mean, you've lived elsewhere, Canada, went to school in Switzerland. Do you see any differences here?
I mean, there are a lot of differences. And just as Dwight has said, we have this kind of a culture that permeates throughout American society at this point. In Switzerland, everybody has an arm because everybody has to do military service, and Switzerland is a neutral country.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't see mass shootings or shootings of any kind, quite frankly, in countries such as Switzerland and other countries throughout the world. And so it really, where you, now that is, except for in countries where, maybe there's militia that is ruling the government, that's different. But in many countries where they have access to weapons, like we have access to weapons, we don't see these mass shootings. This is part, unfortunately, of what has become U.S. culture. It's tragic. It really is tragic. And we need to take a page from the page book of other countries to see how they successfully, countries that have heavy arms as well, how they successfully are able to curtail the shootings, because this is really a phenomenon that we see in the United States.
You know what, I want to pivot to, since we are in a fighting mood, look at what happened with Alejandro Mayorkas. Last week, they were not able to impeach him. And Dwight, you said, when I spoke with you yesterday, you said, look, they got him. They impeached him. And I just said, and now we are in a tit for tat era. And you said that this was what you said we were going to be here.
Yeah, I said that last year before last, when they began to impeach Trump.
No, like 2020.
Yeah, I said that the risk you run is you have to be careful what you wish for, because if you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And what they're going to do is both weaponize impeachment and trivialize impeachment. And so once they went after Trump, it was going to be on, and the Republicans were going to respond in kind. And so now what you have is a tit for tat. And it's very, very dangerous and very, very anti-productive, because now we really don't know when an impeachable offense should be dealt with. We don't know what's real and what's Memorex now. And so you go from Trump being impeached, which, some would say would be legitimate, to Mayorkas being impeached, and some would say that's only payback. And so you really don't know now what's real and what's not real, and what needs to be dealt with and what does not need to be dealt with. It's a real tragic situation that we've all opened ourselves up to.
Well, Senator Kevin Cramer, who's a Republican and a Trump ally, he's from North Dakota. He said it's dead on arrival in the Senate. And so many Republicans have come forward, CK, saying, you know what? This is the dumbest use of our time. This is a bad idea. Now we have sent ourselves down the rabbit hole. And these are Republicans saying this. Mm-hmm. And to Dwight's point, we don't know if it's live or Memorex. You don't know what. I mean, when we heard about impeachment with Nixon when we were children, that was a big. I mean, it stopped the country, right? Mm-hmm. Now we hear impeachment and we shrug our shoulders. Yeah.
Well, I think it's unfortunate, because this is exactly what impeachment was not supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a very, very severe remedy when the conduct is conduct that is, quite frankly, impeachable. Now, basically anyone, depending upon the political dynamics and who controls the House of Representatives and the Senate, anyone is going to be subject to can be subject to the impeachment process. And that's not what it was designed to do. It really isn't. So these members of Congress are making a mockery of a very, very significant statute, a very, very significant right that should be taken very seriously. And it's very unfortunate.
Attorney Jones, what do you see?
Well, I think that what Johnson and the Republicans were actually trying to achieve wasn't simply impeaching Mayorkas, but I think they were trying to generate the issue of border security. And they're trying to attack and raise that issue. I think that ultimately was what they were looking for. And by weaponizing the impeachment process to go after Mayorkas, they were hoping, I think, to raise the issue of the border security. One of the problems that they ran into, I think, initially was with the first vote when they failed, right? Because they didn't anticipate Al Green, wheeled in his wheelchair, no shoes and socks, to cast his vote to stop their impeachment process.
From the hospital.
From the hospital, exactly. I think he had just had intestinal surgery, emergency intestinal surgery. So, they didn't anticipate that occurring. So that threw their game plan completely off, because that really made them look, like buffoons, that they had, that they were losing. They were completely losing ground. And so when they came back this time for the vote, the concept there, I think, was trying to make up for the stupidity that they went through that first time through, and they were able to get it through. But now, how significant will it be? What will the American people think about this? Yeah, I think that most American people are more concerned about their price of groceries right now than the impeachment process. They are concerned. We are concerned about the border. But this doesn't do anything to protect the border. When they had the opportunity, to deal with legislation to protect the border, the Republicans didn't do it. So, in terms of what they were after in generating the issue of the border, I think it generates it, but not in a way that's going to be positive for them, not the way that they wanted to have it positively highlighted as a negative of the Biden administration.
So Dwight, what do you foresee with Republicans and Democrats, and this back and forth that we see, and in between all that, business goes on as usual.
Well, the other thing it does, Daryl, is it trivializes Trump's impeachment. Mm-hmm. And so when you try to use that as political football, the Democrats, and say, well, Trump was impeached twice, and he's the first president that was ever twice impeached, and he has all these counts on him, they can come back and say, oh, yeah, but Mayorkas was impeached too. That's the way politics is played now. And so it takes the sting out of that on Trump's side. I think you said it very well that it does nothing for the issue of the borders. In fact, they sabotaged that last week so that they couldn't resolve that issue. But what it does do is it kind of neutralizes the whole issue around Trump being impeached as a political issue this time around.
So how do you think this will this have an impact on writ large, on electoral politics writ large in 2024?
Well, I think Biden is next. I don't think this is the end of the beginning. I think this is, the beginning of the end. I think this is the end of the beginning. I think Biden is next. I think he's going to be impeached. And whosoever they can find will be impeached. Just again, because now I think it has become tit for tat politics. And I think effectively, I think they'll find out just enough from the hearings to try to stain Biden's political reputation and his family. And they'll go and do it, till it works, as long as it works.
So you really see an impeachment for President Biden looming.
And not just him. I think there'll be other people on in that parade.
Mhm.
What do you think, CK? You have any thoughts about that?
I really don't, not too much, Santita. I just think this is a mockery. This is making a mockery of our democracy. I think that it'd be easy for them to try to impeach President Biden. They've been trying to do it from the inception. It'd be easy for them to try to impeach Vice President Kamala Harris. I think this is all politically driven. I think again, they're making a mockery of our democracy. But I think that the more they push to do this, the worse they're going to look. So they have to be very, very careful, because I think even there are many Republicans who did not agree with this approach and who think that they're taking it too far.
Right.
Well,
In addition,
yes, Daryl.
in addition to what CK has just laid out, the standard for impeachment is supposed to be a high crime or misdemeanor.
Right.
And they couldn't define the high crime or misdemeanor that they're saying that Mayorkas committed. And so, just on its face, it looks bad. Now they're going to waste the Senate's time, right? Because they got the impeachment. Now it goes to the Senate. So now you're going to waste the Senate's time to deal with something that you couldn't even define. You couldn't lay out what the high crime or misdemeanor was, but you're sending this over now to the Senate to take up their time, rather than them dealing with more substantive issues. It really should come back to smack them in the face really badly, I think.
Well, then, I mean, what are we looking at? I mean, in terms of this election, we just saw George Santos was put out of the U.S. House of Representatives, and he was a Republican. I mean, he is a Republican, and now we have his replacement, who is a Democrat, who won rather handily against a black woman. It's kind of funny the Republicans are employing DEI, which they fight all the time, but they're using DEI to find these black and brown and Indian candidates all over the place. But that's something I think we need to look at too. What do you think that his win is a harbinger of good things for the Democrats, or do you just think it's a one-off, Dwight?
I think that it's actually, I think it's going to be built into the rhythm of the party, of the Republican Party. I think that they see an opening and they're going to take it. They're going to exploit it. Whether it works or not is another subject. But I think that they're going to exploit it as much and as long as they can.
What do you think, Daryl?
Yeah, I think that when you look at that election that occurred in New York, the issues that seem to be really at the forefront, one, of course, was the border and immigration, because that is what the Republican candidate was running on. She was pushing the border issue.
Wait a minute, and to your point, Speaker Johnson said, I don't know why the Democrats are rejoicing, because the guy who won ran as a Republican.
So, yeah.
Right.
But the guy that won also ran on the issue of dealing with women's right to choice and reproductive freedom. So, that is out there too. I don't know how much we can really, gain from that election on either side, Republican or the Democratic side, because on the Democratic side, you had someone who ran what historically we would have called a Biden type campaign, right? As a moderate to conservative Democrat. And then on the Republican side, you had I think she's from Ethiopia and Israel and but running against border security or for border security issues. So I don't know how much we really gain out of all that in terms of the insight. The one thing that we do get out of it is the view of the voters that are in that area of where their concerns was, because he won overhandedly, despite all the stuff that she was throwing at him with regards to the border. So perhaps the border issue that they're counting on right now isn't going to be something that the Republicans can really count on. They can't count on the economy because that's right now is going too strong. They can't count on the reproductive freedom because they see that they're losing on those issues. So I think they really will be in a position where they've got to go back and figure out how they're going to retain many of these seats. Got to remember, there are 18 Biden seats that are held by Republicans across the country. All 18, well, now 17, right? Because Santos had one. So 17 more that are out there. All 17 of them, you can rest assured, are trying to figure out what they can do to retain their seats following what happened in New York.
Well, let's pivot to Fani Willis. Boy, oh boy, because it seems that we're still litigating 2020, but it's still with us. And it seems that the case that's at the center of all of these cases that former President Trump, in which he's involved, is the Georgia election case. And Fani Willis, who has been celebrated all over the country because she has had the courage to take this on, and beyond the fact that it is her job, she's taking it on. She has run into the headwinds because one of the 3 special prosecutors who she's hired is a person we found that she has a personal relationship with him. But it's a little bit more complex than that, C.K. Hoffler. One would just think that if you just read the story, right, that she chose someone that she likes, that she was just dating. No, he was her 3rd choice, CK. That's about to come out in a book that CBS producers are about to publish. That he was her 3rd choice. She asked the former governor of the state. He said, no, I don't want the target on my back. If you think I want a security detail for the rest of my life, Fani, you're out of your mind. I don't want it. And the caseload's too heavy. But I really don't want to get caught in this political buzzsaw. So she went to one of your colleagues, one of the most prominent lawyers in the country. What is it, David Banks? He said no for the same reasons. He said, I don't want a target on my back. I don't want it. The caseload, yeah, it's incredible, but I don't want to have to deal with the hatred that is coming my way. Okay, so he's the 3rd guy down. I mean, and I think that's why I said CK at the beginning. I'm like, hey, if you have a relationship with him, admit it. Because number one, we know that going to work is like going to the Hunger Games, the Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. You have some people on your side, you have some people who are not. I don't think that people, if you're not down there, CK, have a real sense of how politically charged this case is and what tremendous personal risk you're taking when you take this case on. And you finally have someone who has your back, who has the courage to take the case on. She brings him on along with 2 others who have the courage to take the case on. And now we've got this. And now it seems that President Trump, he has announced that he is going to court to the hearing. Let's back up. Let's look at this case, because many people are surprised to know that Nathan Wade was not Fani Willis's first choice.
Well, the fact, I'm in the trenches as a trial lawyer. The fact of the matter is, I can tell you there are many cases that I've won, whether I was in practice with Willie Gary or practice in my own firm, for clients where I may not have been the first choice. We may not have been the first choice, but we were the choice that took it to the finish line and took it to victory. So the fact that he is or wasn't or could the first choice, that's of no consequence to me, because oftentimes in my profession, you may have a list of people who you want to take on a case, or you want to act as co-counsel. They may or may not be available. And based on their availability, based on whether there's a conflict of interest, based on whether they want to politically be exposed to some of the dynamics, they may or may not take on the case. That's standard operating procedure where I sit, and has always been. So that's not a big issue as far as I could see. What is the biggest issue is there's nothing illegal about them having a relationship. Let's be clear on that. Nothing illegal. When there's an evidentiary hearing tomorrow, or the day after, it'll be tomorrow, I would bet dollars to donuts that there's not going to be a judicial finding that their relationship was illegal. Why? Because there was no illegality to their relationship. But the allegation is that somehow there was misappropriation of funds that he was paying. And that is where, if there is an impropriety, that's where it would come in. not the relationship itself, because there's nothing illegal about being with someone, because if there were, then everybody would be in jail for illegality. So we have to just drop that, put that in the trash, because that's where it belongs. The only issue is whether when he was paid his fee for the work and the hours that he worked, whether there was a kickback, whether there was any financial impropriety. I'm not seeing any evidence of that, but that will be for the judge to determine, because that is going to be why there's an evidentiary hearing, and that will be one of the determinations. So, depending upon what the judge determines, and this judge, by the way, is taking the safe route, the conservative route, which is giving everyone his and her day in court by having an evidentiary hearing based on all the information that he had before him. He could have very easily, based on the pleading submitted by Fani Willis and the affidavit of Nathan Wade, dismissed this matter, closed it, and moved on to the case at hand, because it is a distraction. But he chose to take this route, and I'm not saying he's right or wrong. That's what the judge chose to do, and that's what's going to happen. So there's going to be an evidentiary hearing, which I bet is going to be very salacious and focus on their relationship and see if there are any inconsistencies with the sworn statement that an affidavit is a sworn statement. So I think it's going to be that. It's going to be a salacious cross-examination. Remember, this is in the backdrop of a domestic case. That's what makes it even more salacious, that Nathan Wade was in the midst of a divorce. But all of this is a sideshow. And none of this points to the case, the underlying case, being dismissed against former President Trump or any of the defendants. It's a sideshow. Worst case scenario, District Attorney Fani Willis is disqualified or removed from the case. That's the worst case, and Nathan Wade. Worst case. But that does not mean that the underlying case will be dismissed. I think people are conflating the two, they're confusing the two, because it's designed for people to do that. And by the way, any defendant, when the stakes are high, when jail is what will happen if convicted, and let's just be clear, the former president will go to jail, not, plead, but go to jail, period, end of discussion, as well as those other defendants, if convicted in Georgia. He's going straight to jail. So when your life and liberty are at stake, of course you're going to use anything and everything in your arsenal, as the one defendant did. It wasn't President Trump's. It wasn't Steve Sadow who did it. He just joined in it because it's salacious and he thinks he can get some leverage from it. But it was another defendant whose attorney raised this issue, who's notorious at raising these types of issues. This is not novel, but it is impactful because this is a high-profile, high-stakes case involving the former president of the United States. That's what it is. So, Santita, what do I predict? Worst case scenario, Fani Willis will be kicked off the case, disqualified from the case. Worst case scenario, so will Nathan Wade. Why do I say that? Because they are litigating the heck out of this case. And again, I go back to the premise. You do not try to get people off a case who are doing a bad job. It doesn't happen. You want weak, ineffective counsel to remain on a case, because then you can run circles around them in a courtroom. They want Fani Willis off the case because of her track record with RICO. They want this whole team to be dismissed. And my view of the world is because there are people who inherently believe that there is misplaced focus and just unbelievable criticism on District Attorney Willis. There are people throughout the country who'd be willing to step in who are phenomenal lawyers. You know, there's the devil that you know and the devil that you don't know. You get this district attorney off the case, that means that there will be a search and a lot of lawyers will come forward to perhaps volunteer their services to work on this case.
Wait a minute, even though she could not pull them in initially?
Well, she didn't pull them in initially because she was just looking at the pool in Georgia.
Okay.
Those lawyers that are on this case are in Georgia. There are hundreds of thousands of lawyers outside the state of Georgia. And by the way, there are thousands of eminently qualified lawyers in this country who could step in. Now, whether they want to be bothered with this, whether they want to have
because to me, CK, that's like the key here. Because when I heard he was the third choice, It doesn't mean that he was an inferior lawyer. It's just the former governor said no.
Well, because former governors usually do say no. Former governors don't want to be bothered with this kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying it's such a big deal. I think I'm just trying to really
It's not
help
a big
people to
deal.
understand. Well, no,
Santita,
I think I want people to understand that this is a big case.
it's a big case, but it is not a big deal. I have to underscore this.
Okay.
I'm in this world. It is not at all a big deal with complex or difficult litigation to have multiple people say, no, I pass. It's not a big deal. In fact, it would be a big deal if everybody jumped at it. That's not the way it works in high stakes litigation and when you have high publicity cases. Many people pass on the cases. That's not a big deal. I don't want us to focus on what really is not a big deal in the legal world. It might be in the non-legal world. It might be in the court of public opinion, but for lawyers, not a big deal at all. And so that's why I don't want people to be misguided by that thought, because that's not a big deal. What's a big deal, what's being made a big deal, is whether or not she exercised the appropriate judgment and whether they exercise the appropriate judgment in having a relationship. You know,
But why do you think that she didn't just say, I have a relationship with him? I mean, because it's not illegal, right?
It's not illegal, but she recognized that this show that's happening now was probably likely going to happen, because you don't have to go too far to go through this analysis. Because anything, when you're involved in high stakes litigation, anything can happen. I told you, I think you're aware of this, in 2000, high stakes litigation, we were involved in when I was in practice with Mr. Gary against Anheuser-Busch. They had 16 private investigators that were hired to go through our trash.
Mm-hmm.
That we were not suing a former president of the United States. We were suing big, huge corporate interests. And by the way, beat them badly. But the fact that they had teams of private investigators, some former FBI agents that had been approached to go through our trash and to do things that, I mean, really, that's pretty, in my impression, unsavory. I'm speaking what's on the record. This is a matter of record. It's just something that people have to understand. When you do high stakes litigation, there are many things that happen. Any effort to disqualify, to discredit you is what people try to do. They tried to get our licenses taken away. Why? Because if we were not on the case, they thought that would minimize the likelihood of a victory on the second case. But they failed in that. So it is not, that was 20 something years ago, in a case that had nothing to do with a former president of the United States. So in high stakes litigation, when people feel that it's complex, a lot of stake, they spend a lot of money, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in some instances, people are going to do whatever they can to muddy the waters. And that's what this is. This is a sideshow. I've yet to hear substantive issues, but again, let's see what happens at the evidentiary hearing. I've read everything that I could read about it. And I just think that the relationship itself is a non-starter. What is something that the court is going to look at is whether there was any financial impropriety. I don't believe there was, but that will be the issue that they'll look at, the receipts and all this kind of stuff, whether there was a kickback. Well, when I dare say, when I get paid the money in the private sector that I get paid in representing clients, not a single person is going to tell me what I can do with that money. That's my money that I've earned. No one has the right to tell me what. Now, I don't work in the public sector. I work in the private sector. But Nathan Wade is in the private sector like me. And he can spend his money that he's earned anyway. Now, it's a different issue if that money wasn't appropriately earned, meaning if the billing was padded or something like that. That's a different ethical and impropriety. That's not what we have here. I don't think there are those allegations.
But CK, the court of public opinion is also what we are dealing with here.
Absolutely.
And
there's an appearance of impropriety.
I think that, there was some political calculations that people who turned down the case and personal calculations. I mean, because they're the one, I didn't say that they didn't want a target on their back. I didn't say that the former governor said, I don't want to have a security detail for the rest of my life. I didn't say that. He said that.
Right.
Well, but wait a minute. Do I?
Yeah. I think that the problem you're going to run is the judge is going to err on the side of caution. Is that because the case is such high profile and so political that he's going to probably take the position as even though it's kind of unproven propriety, on her part, that just so it does not look suspect on my part, I'm going to disqualify her and bring somebody else in. Now with Trump going down there, I think he's going down there not just to intimidate her. I think he's going down to intimidate anybody else who may take the case and let them know that if they take the case, that the all-seeing eye of Trump and his crowd is going to be on them. And so it's going to be very difficult to have somebody come in to deal with that stress, to pick up on a case that there's no real advantage over time for them other than to be more grief than glory. And so I think that, you really run the risk of her being dismissed, having somebody come along who's not that committed to taking the case, and you run the risk of sending signals that even though she did not do anything that was wrong, I don't think she handled it very well, and that she should have just confessed that. And what they're going to look for is that if she misled the judge by saying that, they didn't really have a relationship, and he's going to use that as grounds to dismiss her. She really should have did what you said, Sandy, is come right back out and say, yeah, we have it, and we've fallen in love. It has nothing to do with the case. We've all the expenses have been split. And judge, you need to understand that some people who work together end up with relationships. I think if she'd have gone in that direction, she'd have been okay. But for stalling it and playing games with it, I think she gives him a reason, the judge, to dismiss her from the case.
Let me just clarify one thing. I don't think that she said they didn't have a relationship. She just didn't come out from Jump Street from the beginning, and I think she should have. That's my personal view. She should have come out on Jump Street and said, yes, we have a relationship, blah, blah, blah. But she probably, too, is being advised by attorneys. And one thing attorneys will tell you is get your ducks in the row and do it through the pleading, do it through filing, because, you don't want to piecemeal it. But let me just mention one thing, pick up Santita, on what Dwight McKee just said. Mm-hmm. On one of my radio shows recently, a conservative person who describes herself as a Tea Party person said, yeah, I don't think that this case will be dismissed at all based on this relationship between Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. She said, I really don't think that's the issue. I think that the reason why, this is what she said, the case will be dismissed is because of the judge. And she went through, when the judge was an inspector, he should have done this, he didn't do that, he didn't. So the Republicans and the conservative folks, MAGA folks, their agenda, they're like, this Fani Willis thing, they recognize it's just a little sideshow. That's not going to be the main focus, I believe. It's going to be on somehow, this is just round one. This was some low-hanging fruit. They threw it, you throw stuff up against the wall. Actually, in trial work, you do that and see what sticks. And they're like, oh, this stuff, really? There's traction, really? That they want to get this judge off the case. And that's what a lot of people are working to do, because their concern is that this judge is going to be too open-minded, not Democratic leaning, because he's not a Democrat, but too open-minded, too progressive,
too fair,
that he's going to, Lord forbid, oh my goodness, be fair. And
hold on.
Well, Lord forbid, he's going to just call it how he sees it. So
we have about 7 more minutes here in this segment, because I want to bring a couple more people on because we'll be talking about this in the second hour, everybody. In the second hour, of course, click the link on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and click the link on the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. And of course, we're on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. You don't want to miss this conversation as we're talking about Fani Willis and former President Trump, who is saying, I am going to meet her in court. I'm personally going to court. Wow. You've been in many courtroom, Attorney Darrell Jones. What do you make of this?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I've been a prosecutor. One of the things about being a prosecutor is that it's not for the faint of heart. And I say that for this reason: the prosecutor is going to be living in the community where they're prosecuting people. So it's not like they're in a walled off area. They're going to be in the community where these things are happening. So when you have former President Trump coming in, and what CK was making mention of with regards to her conservative caller talking about the judge in the case and the message being for the judge, let's be clear on this, okay? That Judge McAfee is up for re-election or is up for election at this point in time. So when you have former President Trump coming into his courtroom and being able to have the sideshow, to have the circus, to have the what do they call it? The circus coming to town and saying, this judge is no good, right? He's not one of us. He don't re-elect him, don't elect him. He's in the middle of this battle and he's doing this, he's doing that. It's going to create that type of atmosphere for the judge. So it's going to be an intimidation tactic for the judge in this situation with former President Trump coming to town. And interestingly, Trump's coming to town, and he doesn't have to be in court. Let's be clear. He does not have to be in court for this proceeding. He's coming to court for this proceeding because he wants to send a message with regards to Fani Willis and anyone else who wants to stand in her shoes, that we will research and come up with stuff to come at you, and your personal life will be exposed to. Decide if you want to be involved in this. Do you want to touch this mess? Leave me alone. That's the message that former President Trump is sending by coming into that courtroom to all that would come against him in this scenario.
Reverend Dr. Yeary, you're with us now. I've got about 4 minutes before we go to break and come back for the second hour of more of this conversation. Attorney C.K. Hoffler is fired up, and she is down there with these folks. Woo! This is one time I'm glad I'm not in the ATL. Oh, this is a whole lot. Reverend Dr. Yeary, about 3.5 minutes for you. 4 minutes.
Well, I don't know if I'll need all that long time, but in the words of one of my mother's favorite shows, these are the days of our lives.
Days of our lives.
Yeah.
Don't you remember the soap opera girl?
One life to live, days of our lives, edge of night.
Searching for
As the world turns.
The edge of night.
The edge of night. And I did start with, that was one of my mama's shows, just in case you all think I may have been sitting around watching them with her. But, we have to remember that the former president's focus is really to kind of make himself the focus by whatever means he can use, by whatever issue he can raise, valid or not, legally based or not. And so all of this always comes for me through a lens of, this is free media. It's going to suck all of the air in the room. It's going to take the focus off of the incumbent. And so what he's really doing is he's using all of the various issues that he's found himself entangled with, regardless of what legal challenges he's facing, as the opportunity to really kind of, as the kids would call it, do play. He's pretending that he's the commander in chief. And so he's playing the presidency, playing the role of the president, and occupying the presidency as a dry run. And he's actually just kind of vetting all of the different issues that could be a distraction should he win re-election in November. That's one. Two, I think the part of it is we have to be able to distinguish between the issues. I agree with what I was able to hear, that we've taken the personal life of Fani Willis and we've made it part of her public responsibility as the district attorney in Fulton County. And so provided that that's clear and clean, that there hasn't been any contamination of that process by virtue of her personal interaction, and that's for the judge to decide, recognizing, as Darrell Jones has said, if he's facing election, then we know that that has implications for him. How it will influence his judgment remains to be seen. But I think at the end of the day, if her legal premise for bringing the case is sound and solid, then what we really have is the use of her personal life and maybe some lack of good judgment, right? I think the big issue is to make sure that there's been no conflict of interest where in the vetting of the contract to get this particular prosecutor who's been hired with public dollars, making sure that none of those dollars have come by way of what might be viewed as a kickback. That's where I think things get kind of tricky when you find these kinds of distractions, because we know that prosecutors have all kinds of angles and tools they can use to really kind of be a fly in the ointment. I'm just hoping that she does not then face scrutiny from an outside counsel to start looking at how she selected the prosecutor, what their interactions may have been, was there undue influence brought to bear to get to the decision to bring charges, was there an embellishment of whatever the legal premise may have been. And I think some of that's already been filtered, but it causes all of this stuff to be rehashed and resurfaced. And so it is kind of the soap opera of politics in Georgia, whether it's As the World Turns or These Are the Days of Our Lives. We can't say it's General Hospital because that we don't really have the hospital thing. I couldn't figure out if there was a law soap opera that came, but you know.
What? LA law.
Well, LA law, Boston law, you name it. We kind of find ourselves there. Hopefully she'll be able to bring the focus back to what she's actually been charged to do and finally put to rest any concerns about her judgment. And if the judge decides...
Well, that's the final word. We'll be back on the other side. Everybody click the link so you catch more of this exciting conversation.